So, can we use reason, and only reason, to find God? It's a question as old as time, right? But a huge debate that just blew up on social media has made it feel, well, really urgent. Now, we're not here to declare a winner. Instead, we're going to walk through a fascinating framework from Professor Dr. Javed Iqbal that gives us a clear way to think about this whole thing.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the debate that got everybody talking. Then we'll dig into the limits of our own perception. From there, we'll look at a different way of knowing, intuition, and then tackle that really tough question about suffering. After that, we'll see how science and faith might not be so far apart, and we'll finish up with some practical advice. Let's dive in.
You know, that recent discussion between Javed Iqbal and Mufti Shamail Nadvi, it was about way more than just winning an argument. It really brought up some of those deep, fundamental questions that so many of us have about faith, logic, and our place in the cosmos.
And that brings us to the first big idea in Dr. Iqbal's framework. To even begin to understand the big picture, we have to first get a handle on our own very limited viewpoint. It all comes down to a question of scale. I mean, how much of reality can we actually perceive? The framework kicks off with something from science that's kind of mind-blowing. Think about everything we can see, everything we can touch and measure, all the stars, the planets, you, me, all of it. Well, that stuff makes up a tiny, tiny fraction of what's actually out there. How tiny? Just 2%. That's it. So, what's the other 98%? Well, modern science calls it dark matter and dark energy. But for the sake of this framework, the point isn't a physics lesson. The point is philosophical. The overwhelming majority of reality is literally invisible to us. It's something our reason alone just can't get its arms around.
And this visual really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? If our entire known universe is just this tiny little sliver, like a single grain of sand on a massive beach, is the logic we built on that one grain of sand really powerful enough to understand the entire ocean? That's the challenge.
Okay, so if reason has its limits, what else have we got? Well, the framework introduces this other faculty called wajdan, which is basically intuition. And what's really important here is that it's not presented as an enemy of reason, but more like a partner, a different way of knowing things. This chart lays it out so clearly. On one side, you've got reason, or aql. It's all about thinking, analyzing, and it leads to experiments and scientific theories. But on the other side, you have intuition, wajdan. This is all about personal, internal experience. And the argument here is that just like a bunch of experiments can lead you to a scientific theory, a series of personal experiences can lead you to faith. They're just two different roads to truth. And now we get to the big one. This is often the biggest hurdle for reason when it comes to faith. It's the problem of pain. You know the question, if God is good and all-powerful, why is there so much suffering in the world? This was the exact question Javed Akhtar asked, and it's a heavy one. How do you square the idea of a loving God with the awful suffering we see in places like Gaza? The framework suggests a three-part way to look at this. So the answer this framework gives us, it really asks you to shift your whole perspective. It breaks down like this. First, the universe runs on a set of fixed, unchangeable principles. Think of them like the laws of nature. Second, and this is key, humans have total free will to act within those laws. And that leads to the third point, which is the heart of it. Everything we see happening in the world, the good and the bad, is a direct result of the choices we make. So the responsibility, well, it lands squarely on our shoulders. We're often told that science and faith are at war with each other, right? But this framework flips that script. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, there are two different languages trying to talk about the exact same thing.
Now, check this out. It's a pretty fascinating comparison. Quantum physics tells us that at the most basic level, everything is just energy. And then you have this verse from the Quran that describes God as the light of the heavens and the earth. Now, the framework isn't saying these are the same things scientifically. The point is philosophical. It's suggesting that both of these worldviews, using their own language, might be pointing to a similar, non-material foundation for all of reality. And here's another thing. The framework points out that even science has its own kind of faith. See, every scientific model is built on certain assumptions you just have to accept to get started. You can't prove them from inside the system. Take quantum physics. It's built on the fundamental idea that you can't predict an electron's behavior with 100% certainty. Scientists just have to accept that as true to move forward. So in a way, both science and faith require you to accept some things first. So, after all this theory, what you actually do. When your brain is spinning and you're lost in questions that reason can't seem to answer, what's the practical advice here? The path forward is actually pretty simple and personal. It starts with a dose of humility, just admitting that maybe your own reason doesn't have all the answers. The next step is to find a guide, someone you trust, someone with real experience. And then, by following the path they've laid out, the idea is you can find your own sense of peace and clarity without having to reinvent the wheel.
And we end with this quote that just wraps it all up perfectly. When you can't find the way, holding the hand of an experienced guide is wisdom itself. It really leaves you with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? In this big search for truth, maybe the smartest thing our reason can do is to know when to let go.